This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Some of you may have seen a report we published last summer called the Financially Sustainable University. And what that report said was about a third of universities in this country are trending in the wrong direction. If you look at the y-axis, that was the equity ratio, which is effectively a measure of balance sheet health. And if you look at the x-axis, that was the expense ratio, which is just effectively operating expenses over revenue. It's a P&L statement. The two most simple and basic financial metrics you can use. And some might argue it's overly simplistic, and I'd say you're right, because if we tried to make adjustments across 4,000 universities in this country, we would have gotten to something that was meaningless and not useful. This is simply meant to provide some direction and an overview of where the nation in this industry is headed, which is not good. There are a lot of universities that are out there that are struggling financially, have been struggling financially, and we need to figure out how to get them back on the right footing if we're going to continue to lead the world as the best educators out there. What's interesting is you look at different segments of universities, this plays out very differently. You can see whether it's private research, public research, elite liberal arts, more what I'd call a regional public or a tuition-dependent private. The mix of who's performing well and who's not performing well looks a little bit different. What's so interesting is that the private research and the elite liberal arts actually have the most red in their charts. And there's two reasons for that, fundamentally. One is that those groups actually have the greatest resources. And so from a private giving and an endowment perspective, those campuses were able to weather the storm a little bit and take a bit of a financial hit over the period of this study, which was 2006 to 2010. So, recognizing that the time horizon was a little bit skewed. But those schools were able to do some things because of their strength of their balance sheet to smooth out expense hits and other things like that. The second, though, is that these universities are also generally the most complex, particularly the private research universities and the public research universities. When you look at the number of colleges, the number of operating units within these campuses, they've got the greatest breadth, therefore the greatest fragmentation, therefore the hardest to manage to a certain degree. So it's a little bit harder to actually rein in expense and control expense in these environments than it is in a smaller university that has a lot less complexity to it, where you can set a target, manage a budget relatively quickly. Just coming back to that notion of the balance sheet, which was the y-axis, they're getting a lot more leveraged. And if you looked over, again, this was that time period, 2002 to 2008, before they really took a big hit. What you saw in terms of relative year-over-year growth were property, plant, and equipment, interest expense, and long-term debt all growing at significantly faster rates than the cost of instruction. And so as an outsider looking in, it's a little concerning that the core mission of the university is not where the greatest resources are going, which is the faculty teaching students. Granted, infrastructure is important. You need infrastructure to have the best labs, to have the best classrooms, to attract the students, attract the faculty. I get it, and I understand that. But there's a point at which you get out of balance in the growth of those financial ratios. And for many universities, I believe they've crossed that line and gotten a little bit out of whack in terms of how they're spending. The other concerning thing around the debt, if you go back and you read some of the Moody's reports from 08, 09, and 2010, what you see is a lot of universities taking on a lot of debt and not putting it into infrastructure. There are actually a lot of universities using debt to pay for operating expenses. And you can get away with that in the short term, but that is not a very sustainable long-term financial strategy.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.